Hello and welcome. My name is Lexi Jong, and here I like to talk about luxury beauty. Today we are going to be talking about the new Sonia G Niji Pro brush. And I want to say thank you so much to Sonia G, or Sweet Makeup Temptations, and Beautylish for sending me this brush, and it's incredible. So a little bit about this brush. It is going to be made out of undyed black and white goat hair. So it's not a mix of dyed and undyed like some of her other brushes that might have more of that variegated appearance as well. This is all undyed, but it's black and white hairs. So I think it's absolutely stunning. It's also very, very soft, and it's made out of Psycho goat hair. So very, very top notch. And I have to say that, I think it's stunning to look at, but it's even better to use. And it feels incredibly soft. So I'm running my finger over here so you can see how the bristles move. And you can see how dense it is, yet flexible. So we're going to go over a few comparisons. Now I've already washed and dried this brush. This little crimp is just from when it was drying, it kind of hit something else. So the brush is actually perfect, so ignore that. But this is incredibly soft. It retails for $85 US. Like most of Sonia G's other brushes and launches, it's probably going to go quickly. So first one I want to compare it to is the Face Pro. And I actually just picked this up from the Beautylish sale. Haven't really tried it yet. So I can't talk too much about the functionality of this, but I wanted to show you the difference in the movement. So look at this. When you go this direction, you're not really going to use this way, but just so you can see this, there's a lot of resistance when you get to about here and it springs back. Whereas this is going to be a lot more flowing motion. And then you can see here the difference. Okay, so when you're looking at these brushes and you're looking at them for application, okay, this brush for me, the way I like to use it is I put it on like this, and then I like to turn it and kind of buff it in. So dabbing it on, you can see if you're dabbing that it is dense enough that your bristles are not really bending, but you actually feel like you're depositing product. When you are moving it across the surface, you can see how the density allows the bristles to remain pretty much in the same spot with a little bit of bend. So you're not going to be buffing this all over the place. The brushes are not splaying out, so your product's not going to move everywhere. It's still going to stay in that same general location, but there's enough softness and density here to buff out those edges as well. So if you look at these fibers, okay, from about right here, these are the shorter hairs. And then it gradually gets taller or longer to about here. Then it's pretty much flat on the top. There's a little bit of rounding, but it's a very small curve here, right? And you can see that's how it goes on both sides. But if we're looking at these ends here, we've got the same deal. So we got the shorter hairs here, they gradually go up. And you can see this is obviously going to be a bit of a steeper curve compared to going in this direction. Now, in comparison, the Face Pro, we have more of an angled brush. This one's going to be a little bit looser. And, this is great for bronzer or blush as well. I find that the Niji Pro is actually perfect for bronzer, especially for somebody like me where I want to dab on a little bit because I want to be cautious not to use too much. This brush is much better for dabbing a product on than this, just because this is a little bit softer and looser. So it bends a little bit more. Okay, does that make sense? So then moving on, dabbing this on and then blending it like this is very soft. You can just kiss the skin. And yeah, so that's with the Face Pro. Big difference here is just how much flexibility and movement you're going to have here. And this is a mix of dyed and undyed goat hair. Whereas again, this is all undyed goat hair, which means technically you can use this with cream products as well. Now I did just want to mention that these goat hairs, this is all the Psycho grade of goat hair, which is, it's not the very highest, it's like the second level, the second highest. So it's incredibly soft, but as such, it also feels a little bit finer than, for example, like a Sokoho goat hair, which just feels a little bit sturdier. So this actually is not as soft as squirrel, but it's getting closer to that, and the hairs themselves feel a little bit more fine. So even though technically I think you can use this with creams and liquids, I personally probably won't, just because they still feel like a finer hair. And one of the biggest reasons, in my opinion, not to use creams and liquids with finer hair like squirrel and so forth is because as those liquid and cream products dry on the brush, you know, even if it's just for like a few minutes while you're doing the rest of your makeup, as they dry on there, they're creating sort of like a little crust on there. And if you then move the bristles, you could potentially snap off a hair, or even when you're like rinsing them off and so forth, you know, it's just, it can be damaging. So I personally will not be using it for creams and liquids, but I think technically you can. Now, another comparison. This one here is a Sonia G Master Face. Again, this is going to be dyed and undyed goat hair. This is one of my favorite brushes, but actually I use this for face powder or blush. And this has a good density here. You can see that you've got some movement and flexibility, but it's dense enough that it's still, again, it has a similar movement to the Niji Pro. So I do think that the densities are similar on these two brushes. They're not exactly the same, but I think they're pretty comparable. The biggest difference is going to be obviously your shape and your size of it, and that's going to determine your functionality in this case. But I do think because of the density, they're both going to be good at buffing, not something like the Smooth Buffer, which is going to be even better at buffing. But I think these two are pretty comparable for a medium buffing job, in my opinion. Now, again, because of this shape, some people may like to use this one for bronzer. I know a lot of people do use this brush for bronzer. I personally prefer to use it for like powder or blush, and I use it more in a circular motion typically. Whereas this, I feel, really is the quintessential bronzer brush because of the shape and the way that it goes onto the skin. Next, let's take a look at the Rephr 22 brush. Now, you may have this with different handle and so forth. I have one of the original like prototypes from, this is the P22 version. So they have changed like the handle and so forth. But if you have the 22, the head, I believe, should be the same. So if you take a look at these two heads, first of all, look at the ferrule here. You can see how this angles up. It's a little bit more triangular versus straight. That's going to allow it to give a little bit more control here in the center of the brush, because you're essentially making these hairs a little bit shorter, which gives them a little bit less movement versus something like this, which is going to keep it all even across. So you're going to have the same amount of movement. So if you take a look at this, this is going to be a pretty dense brush. It's bigger headwise. You can see the thickness it's going to be a little bit thicker as well. And if you look at the tops, you can see that the P22 overall, or 22, is bigger. It's longer and everything. Because it does have those longer hairs, you are going to have more movement, more flexibility here. Angling, we do have similar angles. One of the biggest difference is the way this is crimped. You can see this is going to be more of a wider oval compared to this, which again, you've got the crimping here. Again, you've got kind of this oval shape, but because of this triangle here, you're going to have a little bit more, a little less flexibility here, a little bit more sturdiness right in the center. And because of this, it's going to flay out a little bit, or splay out a little bit on the sides into more of a fan shape, essentially, than this one here that goes straight out, just because of the way that this crimping here is done. Now, again, the length of the bristles will also make this a little bit less, a little fluffier. So if you take a look at the movement of this one, you can see how much movement there is. This is a very big brush. A lot of people like it for bronzing. For me, it's too big. And then look at how these move. So you're going to be able to keep your product in a specific place a little bit easier with the Niji Pro than with the 22. For me, I personally like the Rephr 24 for bronzer. Let's look at that. You can see that this one here doesn't have as much movement. It's a much smaller brush overall. It's essentially a smaller version of the 22. So it's going to be shorter, and you know, width is actually going to be more similar between these, but the Niji Pro is still just a little bit more narrow here than the 24. Okay, and I actually think the 24 performs a little bit more similarly to the Master Face from Sonia G than it does to the Niji Pro. But you can see here the movement. And last up, this is a synthetic brush. This is the Esom V49. Sorry, this is one of my hairs. But this is synthetic versus the Niji Pro. You can see that size-wise, the Niji Pro is definitely gonna be a little bit wider. It's also just a touch shorter than the Esom. And really, the only reason I wanted to compare this is because the head sizes, you know, they're both on the larger side. But again, this is going to be much airier. You can see there's a lot more bend and flexibility with this. This is really more of a powder or a blush brush versus this. But I did want to compare something with synthetic fibers as well. So those are all typically brushes that you might use with a bronzer, but I also wanted to compare a couple of Sonia G's fan brushes. This one here is the Sculpt 1. This is her biggest fan brush, okay? And as I mentioned before, you've got kind of this arch here, but you can see this is rounded, whereas this is going to be a little bit more triangular. Okay, and that's going to give the ends and everything here, it's just going to behave slightly differently, because essentially this shape is making these hairs much longer than these, whereas this is not going to be as much of a difference. So this is going to be denser and a little bit more structured still versus the fan brush, which is going to be like that in the center, but then the ends here are going to be able to have a lot of flexibility and movement. So just size comparisons here. So overall, personally, I have to say I don't really use my Sculpt 1 very much, but I do know some people like it as a bronzer. If you like this brush, first of all, I have to say the Niji Pro is softer. Okay, the Sculpt 1 is not quite as soft as the Niji Pro. And if you take essentially this portion of the brush and what this part of it feels like, that's more like what the Niji Pro feels like. Okay, these ends here move a little bit too much. They have a little bit too much length and flexibility here. So if you want kind of a comparison, the movement here is going to be more similar, but it's slightly more dense than the Sculpt 1 here. And then just another quick reference. This is the Worker fan from Sonia G's Sky set. And again, we've got the same type of ferrule here as on the Sculpt 1. This is going to be a smaller brush, but it's a fairly dense fan brush. And you can see the difference in movement here. This is still going to have a lot more movement than the Niji Pro. So just for size reference. All right, so I'm just going to bring you in a little closer, and we're going to add just a little bit more bronzer using this brush so you can kind of see how it goes. Let's actually apply a little bit of powder first so you can see how this brush can be used for other things. This is the Chantecaille Cle de Peau. So just going to get some powder on here, and you can see that you can use this, you know, this brush would actually be useful for like a powder foundation as well. Especially if you're not trying to like truly like buff it into the skin a lot. So that's the Cle de Peau, one of my favorite powders, by the way, or it is my favorite powder. Look at that versus this side. Pretty nice. But let's go ahead and move on to bronzer. So this is the Sisley Fude Poudre Compact in 4 bronze, and you can see how much powder comes up. Let me just wipe a little bit of this off. So I'm just dabbing a little bit of this on my cloth. You can still see that there's plenty of bronzer on here. And let's just put this on. So you can swipe it like this to get more of like that whole like beachy bronzed look. if you want to like have bronzer on the cheeks. Okay, you can see that it works really well going around the perimeter of the face. Now let's do the other side, and we're going to use it for blush as well. So just going in with the Cle de Peau first and putting some of this on so that way both sides start off the same. And this time, let's use this a little bit more like a contour shade. Put some on there, just dab some off. We'll put it here in the hollows. Okay, so dabbed it on. You can see that totally made a huge difference here. And then I just wiped off the brush and I'm just kind of buffing that a little bit. So you can see that it's gonna blend that out nicely. Okay, and then let's try a little blush as well. Now I do have a blush on, so we're just gonna add a little bit more on top. This is the Tom Ford Brazen Rose. So just wipe some of that off. There we go. So if you're looking for an area where you can cover a large area with blush or bronzer or something, this is a great brush for it. I'm going to go ahead and cut to a clip that shows me applying just bronzer with this. So I just put on a little bit of the powder, and then for bronzer, we're going to try a couple of new things here. So we have the new Sonia G Niji Pro brush. So this is designed specifically for use as a bronzer. This is actually all undyed goat hair. It's just a mix of black and white goat hair. So I mean, you can see this is just from the way I dried it. So unfortunately it got pressed against a different brush there, but the brush itself is incredibly soft. You can see that everything, it gets in there like pretty perfectly. So this is already washed and dried. And for bronzer, we're going to take the Sisley Fude Poudre Compact. So I picked this up in the deepest shade to use as a bronzer. So this is shade 4, bronze. It does come with a piece of plastic and a little like cushion. Now I use the lightest shade in this for, you know, face powder, but we're going to use this for bronzer. So this is how much comes up just from tapping it on the pan. I'm going to try to get some of that off. There still looks to be a lot of pigment, so I'm going to just pat it on the cloth of my lap first. And then let's see. All right, so there's the bronzer. Wow, even after wiping it off, you can still see a bunch. So I can tell you that this brush feels incredibly soft, and it actually feels very dense and firm. There's not a lot of bristle movement gliding it across your face. So this is going to work really well for products that are a little bit firmer in the pan as well. Or, you know, anytime you want to get a product in a particular place, obviously it's a large brush, so you're going to be using a larger area, but it's going to deposit it and put it there nicely. So take a look at the rounded edges here. So I hope that was helpful. As you can see, this brush does have multiple uses. You can use this for powder, blush, bronzer. You could use it for like a larger swath of highlight. Here, let me go ahead and put a little bit of that on. This is the Makeup by Mario in Opal. And if you want a truly glowy skin, go ahead, add your highlighter with this. Look at that. So I think this brush is very versatile. For me personally, with the other brushes I have and everything, I personally think that this brush is fantastic for bronzer, or even like contour if you want to blow it out a little bit. So for me, I will probably be using this exclusively for bronzer. It's so incredibly soft. It makes it a joy to use. And I do think that this would also be a good brush for powder foundation. So I don't wear powder foundations a ton, but I think this is one that I would reach for when I am doing that. So my favorite powder foundation is the Suku powder foundation. That thing is incredible. I just wish they had more shades. So this brush I think would be great for that. You can also use it for blush and highlight depending on what kind of look you're going for. For me personally, I would probably choose to use a smaller brush most of the time for that, but you know, you can use this one for everything if you really need to. So again, personal opinion, perfect bronzer brush. It's got the right amount of density. It's incredibly soft. It's going to keep everything in the place that you put it and only buff out those edges a little bit. So that way you're not making a mess. So I think it's a really fantastic brush. So if you are somebody who wears bronzer every day, this brush might be a game changer because you're able to put it on very quickly, very softly, and it works so well. If you are somebody who does not really wear bronzer, this might be one that you can pass on, but I think it's a fantastic brush in anybody's collection. So thank you so much for watching. I hope this was helpful. If you have any additional comparison requests, please be sure to let me know and I'd be happy to accommodate if I have those brushes. And please leave any comments or thoughts down below in the comment section. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day and stay safe and healthy.